What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Turn the Jets podcast. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at WillPod11 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. All 32 Pod TOJ Talks. The resume grows, which is always a nice thing. We're in a Jet Steelers week. Davante Adams is not only officially a Jet, he's now done 800 media appearances and actually practiced as a Jet for the first time. I have to be honest, I don't think you could have drug tested me enough times if I asked if Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and Aaron Rodgers would be in the same offense playing for the Jets. A couple of years ago, special episode here, Jon Ledyard, who we met a couple of years ago at the Combine and Senior Bowl and the whole 9 yards, does a lot of really awesome stuff, including covering the Steelers. And with it be Jets Steelers week, no better person to have on. John, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing awesome, man. Always a good time to get to talk ball with you. Always something I really appreciate, and I am excited about this matchup too. As excited as you can be for two teams that the vibes have been this week for. I would say the Steelers, in the midst of a quarterback controversy. Oh, it's week. Yeah, we're going into week 7. That makes sense. Sure, that's good. And then the Jets, obviously, in the midst of whatever it is this season has been, which I'm sure we'll talk about some. But it's certainly been a wild ride for both of these teams in different ways.
Yeah, I want to get into the Steelers in a minute. I want to just talk a little bit more about Davante and kind of just what this trade really means. I think there's been a lot of, I guess maybe the pushback from folks that don't necessarily love the trade would be, hey, they're 2-4. This team doesn't look quite as good as I think many thought they were going to be going into the year. What's the upside of getting this done? I think for me, it comes down to, I think he makes his offense significantly better, personally. I think he does a lot of the things that they don't do well, which is beat man coverage. Someone has trust with Aaron Rodgers, another weapon to deal with. And I also feel like this isn't, it's Davante's talked pretty clearly. This isn't a rental. He wants to, him and Aaron will probably be here at least 18 months. Davante maybe a little longer. We'll see how that kind of all rolls. And it's a 3rd round pick, which by all reports, the Jets offered 2 2s last year at this time. So to get Davante for a 3, it's a kind of a shame it didn't get done maybe a week ago. I would have liked to see him here for the Bills game. But what do you make of the trade overall? Are you more on the Nick Wright, Nick Wright side of things? Davante is not that good anymore, and the Jets don't need. He doesn't make the Jets better. Are you more on the Dan Orlovsky side of things, where it's like, hey, Davante takes them back into the class with the Baltimore's, Kansas City's, Buffalo's of the world?
Somewhere between those extremely different realities. What in the world? This is what I get for not paying attention at all to mainstream talk, network television / shows at all. Did not know either of those things. Absolutely wild.
I ratioed Nick Wright into oblivion, and I took a lot of pride in it, to be honest with you.
That is like, does Nick Wright watch ball? Like, come on, this is ridiculous.
I literally tweeted and was like, I guarantee they talked about Davante when he requested the trade, and I was like, I guarantee if he goes to the Jets, he will be washed up, and this trade won't be a good thing. And instantly, while getting traded, he was like, oh, he's got a gimpy hamstring, and this doesn't make them better. I was like, you fucker, I knew it.
That is absurd. He is clearly going to help the team. I don't know how there would be any question about that. The nice thing about this is, whereas I'm usually these moves are usually more cool on paper than they are actually in reality. This is a different story, I think, because Adams already knows this offense pretty well. It is probably worth mentioning. I probably will anger some of your listeners. I'm not going to defend Nathaniel Hackett. Of course, I don't think he's like the greatest offensive coordinator.
He's unoffendable.
Yeah, I was going to say, or even an offensive coordinator more. I mean, I don't know what you call him, I guess now, non-play caller. But what I do think, to his credit, and Ollie and I have talked about this a lot on our show over the Read Optional podcast, we've talked a lot about the fact that Nathaniel Hackett is actually trying to do very modern things. He's trying to do things that LaFleur and Shanahan and all these cutting edge OCs are trying to do. He's putting them in the offense, and they're not being executed well because the players aren't good enough. And part of that is the sequencing of plays. Part of that, Rodgers has made mistakes. Some of that is, that he does get away from things too quickly. Hackett has in the past. And obviously now with Downing there, we'll see over a larger sample size what actually changes and what doesn't. I only say all that to prompt kind of what I'm going to say about Adams, in that he will know, I think, a lot of the roots of the offense in terms of verbiage and things like that. And then he will obviously get on the same page with Rodgers very quickly. And ultimately, although I do think Hackett is trying to script in these things early on, or now maybe Downing will try to script in these things early on, I also think that I've seen it in the games. Rodgers wants to go back to the things he's super comfortable with, and so he just does. And Adams going to be familiar with those things, and so there's probably going to be some tug of war over like what is our identity offensively, what is the root of what we run all season long to some degree. And Adams helps assuage all of that. I would say like he makes the scripted stuff better because you can plan stuff for a guy who's now way more talented than Alan Lazard and even Garrett Wilson, to be honest with you, and certainly Mike Williams. That can all happen, and then also you get the added benefit of the symbiosis of his relationship with Rodgers and how on the same page they are when it comes to clutch time moments, red zone where everything happens so quickly. I think 2-minute drill when you're going with tempo, which the Jets have been really good at this season, he adds another layer to that. So he makes everything better, no question about that. The only questions you'd have are, I'm kind of like the anti-conspiracy theory guy. I don't believe in any conspiracy theory. So like I'm naive enough to be like, oh yeah, Davante Adams hamstring, I think it's actually a real injury. Now, could he have played this week against the Steelers if he was healthy? Maybe that's true, but like I don't think he was like totally healthy this entire season. So you do worry about at his age, is he going to continue to remain healthy? That's fair. He hasn't been out there, and now he switches teams. So like the regimen changes and everything like that. There's some maybe a little bit of concern there. But in terms of what he brings them, no, I have no doubt if he's on the field, he's going to be helpful. Davante Adams is still awesome. They're obviously going to be a contract restructure at some point if he stays there, I'm sure. And so I'm not really worried about anything on the field. Whereas like you and Amari Cooper trade, for example, like the Bills hardly paid anything. They gave up a third. That's probably too much. But they have a lot of picks. So, like, whatever. They had to do something. I get it. But I have no idea. Cooper could be bad on the field all the rest of this year, and I wouldn't be surprised about that at all. He could look like last year, Amari Cooper, and I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. So that has a big, wide range of outcomes on the field. To me, this on the field is clearly going to help the Jets. The only question to me is it enough? Does Davante Adams have to be the savior for this franchise, given where they're currently at their record, but also just like, it doesn't seem like there's like an arrow pointing up anywhere really for this team. And so he has to represent that basically, whereas Cooper doesn't have to represent that for Buffalo. He is get us a few drives in the playoffs, big moments in the playoffs and in big games once we win this division type of thing. The Jets have to close that gap, and they really need more out of Adams. And he's better than Cooper, so that should help. But it still, I think, is a question mark as how much he's going to be capable of helping them, if he's going to be able to help them enough at this point.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm sure, I don't disagree that I think there was maybe a small little, hey, the hamstring's barking a little bit, but it was like it's really easy to you got to have some reason why you initially hold out of practice. Mike Williams missed 2 days today with personal reasons.
Yeah, that was personal,
AKA I'm getting traded. And I'm pissed off that you guys acquired a player much better than me. Sure. And Rodgers called me out in public. I think you mentioned the chemistry there. Yeah, it was tough for Mike. It was tough for Mike. Well, 2 weeks in a row though, you burn Rodgers twice in a row where he goes to you, and even if it's his fault, if he feels like you burned him, you're done. But no, Davante talked about him and Aaron were kind of, I guess Davante flew out, Monday night, and it was kind of before the game, the deal got done. And I guess, he's been staying there, and he went on Kay Adams' show today and said that him and Aaron went through all their hand signals, even dating stuff back to 2014. This is why these two guys are amazing. They have the memories of, I don't even know what the best way. They're Mike Ross in suits. I mean, these guys are. Yeah. That's the way they are. And he said he know 95 to 96% of the stuff he didn't even have to like refresh on. It was just like, "Yep, I got you." And like, just Orlovsky, I thought did a really good breakdown today on ESPN, talking about how I can't remember who he was doing the breakdown with, but Davante's always, him and Aaron were always like, this route's a 25-yard route on the hash, and like Davante's there, and Aaron puts it on him. And I think that's just been something they've struggled with this year, where you finally saw Garrett start to get going the last 2 weeks, specifically last week, where against Buffalo, his usage, his route tree was so much better. Downing had him in motion. He had him in the backfield. He had him a bunch of these deep crossers and deep ins, as opposed to like Garrett's a really good player, and sure, a bunch of hitch routes and slants is nice, but like that's more like Davante's role, and he's going to beat man coverage, and he's going to use his footwork, etc. Garrett's like running like Gumby and like running around and just like taking these ridiculous strides and like weird movements that you're like, I don't know how this works, but it does. I think this is going to benefit him, a whole heck of a lot. I want to ask you, just from a Steelers perspective, obviously the biggest news coming into this game, I want to touch on TJ Watt for a minute, because I think he's one of the 5 best players in the NFL, and we just continue to try to find other guys that are better than him, and there aren't. Like Micah's not, whatever. It's a whole nother discussion, but the Justin Fields, Russell Wilson thing's weird. The Steelers team reminds me a lot of the Jets team from 2 years ago, where really well coached on defense. They had like holding teams really, down. The quarterback wasn't really turning the ball over too much. They don't really look like a 4-2, 5-2 team, but at the same time, you can't fault them for winning 4 of those games. What do you, I guess, make of this team overall? And then I want to touch on the quarterback because it plays a huge part in this game. I think I like the Jets better in this game now that we know Russell Wilson may be starting.
Yeah, we'll see who starts. I wouldn't be surprised if Tomlin actually does stick with Fields. It's probably more likely, that he goes with Russ, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of Albert Breer said it yesterday, and it's all I've heard is that there's a lot of people in the building that do want Justin Fields to continue to play there. I think Russ is actually at this point at least well liked in the room too, but Fields is. I mean, if
he hasn't done a post-game presser yet after a loss.
Yeah.
Just wait.
If you talk to anybody in Chicago, like everybody loved Justin Fields. I mean, like as a person, like DJ Moore, they're like literally they have the first pick and they're gonna draft Caleb Williams. Everybody on planet Earth knows it. And DJ Moore is still out there talking to the media and saying, Justin's our guy. Like, that's my guy. Like, I fully believe, like, we can take the next step with him as our quarterback. Like, no reason to be saying this stuff. Like, you could easily take the company line. And he was just, like, standing on the table for this guy. And so it is that is how people feel about him as a person. Like, he is really well liked. So that makes this hard, I think, because there are a lot of players that are like, man, we're 4-2. Like, Justin's legs. You know how NFL players are with quarterbacks who can run and make people miss and run over guys. And players love that. Like, they don't think about the fact that he missed a guy on third down. They think about the highlight play that he made. So that makes it tricky. Tomlin, of course, is the right coach to be able to make a hard decision like that. My personal take on it, I've talked about it a lot on my shows, but like, I think that Justin Fields definitely has weaknesses. That's obvious. Everybody knows that. I also think he's played pretty well this year. I don't think he played well the last 2 weeks. That is part of this evaluation for sure. You could definitely make the argument it's trending down. You could definitely make the argument that he's making more mistakes. He has like 6 turnover-worthy throws or 6 turnover-worthy plays in the last 3 weeks, I think, and he didn't have hardly any through the first couple weeks of the season. So you could definitely argue that those things are catching up with him. He's regressing back to the mean of those ways, and I would hear that out. I also think he saves this offense from itself all the time, and Russ can't do that. So, yes, does Fields deserve to be considered? Does Fields played well enough to keep somebody else from being deserved to be considered to play this position for the Steelers on Sunday night? Yes, I definitely think that that's true. Is that player Russell Wilson? No, I do not think that's the case. And so that's kind of where you leave yourself is like, yeah, I get it, but like Russ isn't the guy to save you either. Specifically his particular skill set, an offensive line this compromised by injury, to be fair, and the fact that Broderick Jones is still out here, like that's compromising them. But also, like, the reality is Rush can't get out, or he can't save them from themselves from a protection standpoint. Now you don't have Zach Frazier in this game, like either, who's been one of the best centers in the league this season. So that's just all that stuff's killer. Like, Russ can't move like Fields can. He takes away from your run game because you can't scheme things up in that way. They're going to need to be able to run the ball well. The Jets have really struggled to stop the run. They've struggled to stop scrambling quarterbacks. They've struggled to tackle. All of those things become much harder for New York if Fields is on the field and easier if Wilson's on the field. So particularly for this matchup, I think it's a bad idea to make this change, even if I appreciate the fact that Tomlin is trying to do what's best and looking at the process rather than the results. Everybody will be like, oh, 4-2, why would you make this change? That part doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is I don't think the backup's actually better than the starter.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the things that the Jets struggle with defensively, especially with the amount of injuries, DJ Reed, Michael Carter, both likely not going to play. The edge spot, across from Will McDonald and Quinn Williams is a disaster right now, obviously without Hassan Reddick, who it's anyone's guess what's going to happen with Hassan Reddick at this point. It doesn't matter how many people you talk to. I don't think anyone has a fucking clue what's going on. And you can tell because no one's talking about it anymore. Drew Rosenhaus is pleading on Emmanuel Acho's show for Reddick to play for the Jets. That's where we've gotten to here. And it just feels like, the Jets have seen Russ the last couple of years in Denver. Russ doesn't throw well over the middle of the field. The Jets struggle defending over the middle of the field right now, especially, at points. Chuck Clark's going to miss this game. Like, it just feels like, as much as I don't think Fields is great, I do think he would have been the more difficult matchup. And obviously, who's to say we don't see 2 quarterbacks in this game? I want to touch on the Steelers defense. You mentioned well, you did mention the offensive line. I do think that's a big issue here, but I also think that the way the Jets defensive line's playing, they're going to have to show me something. They just haven't showed me in the last couple weeks. Defensively, the Steelers team, I think, is we know the bigger names, but I think this is correct me if I'm wrong, but watching them on tape, it feels like it's TJ Watt and then everybody else just doing their job well. Like, I don't think anybody else at this point in their career, Minka is a great player, obviously, and Cam Hayward stuff. I think they have one superstar, and then they have a bunch of good players all playing really well at the same time. Is that mischaracterizing this defense, or is it because I just feel like Minka and Cam aren't necessarily exactly the players they've been throughout their whole career, but they're still good enough by name value, and then everybody else around them is playing well, and Highsmith as well. And then TJ Watt's one of the 3 or 4 best players in the NFL, barring position. Throw a position out, he's one of the 3 or 4 best.
I think Cam Hayward's had the best season of any Steeler defender, to be honest.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, that's why I said, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think he's been a defensive player of the year type of candidate. I mean, the numbers certainly back that up, the grades. And if you look at any of the metrics and stuff, they'll all be like, they're all pretty firmly in Hayward's corner. It's sort of like Chris Jones in a tier by himself when it comes to pass rushing. And these are most of the metric results that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the actual production, although Hayward has that too, if you want to go by counting numbers. But he's been utterly dominant. After Chris Jones, the pass rusher, it is kind of Hayward and then probably, Dexter Lawrence. Those guys are kind of showing up in the metrics, like most spots in that next group. Pretty much just the 2 of them, like especially if you're taking into account the snaps played and stuff. Although Calais Campbell's having a pretty underrated year too.
Yeah.
He's not playing as much, but Hayward is just kind of like, there's nothing he doesn't do well. And that's always been the case when he's healthy. Last year he got hurt, came back, but wasn't 100%. Like, and he was open about that the whole year. He's like,
yeah, when you're at D-line, when you have lower body stuff, like you're just.
Exactly. Yeah. He just couldn't explode. He was really good still. He couldn't explode on pass rush. That was the biggest thing. So he had nothing, and he's a speed to power rusher. He builds everything off that. So, but I mean, man, he has been unblockable for people. He gave Quentin Nelson hell. Like, he has really just been a monster every single week. For them, he is playing. I honestly, as somebody who's watched him closely his whole career, he's playing as well as he's ever played. So that, I mean, Hall of Fame level talent, playing at that peak, he's been unbelievable. Herbig won't play in this game, obviously, but he has also been unbelievable when he's been out there this season. Now that's only been like 2.5 games really that he's played like a real role in, but he's been like literally, I mean, one of the best pass rushers. Like, you will have a hard time finding a more explosive player off the ball in the whole league than Nick Herbig. So he adds another dimension when he's out there. In this game, though, yeah, Highsmith's been really solid this season. Really good run defender, really good in coverage, I would say. Really good, solid player. Clear starting caliber guy. Has a lot in his bag as a pass rusher. Just doesn't have the athleticism, burst, or bend. He's got to figure out the snap count. And when he does that, then he's a real threat. But otherwise, he's just pretty ordinary off the ball and then not really that flexible of an athlete. But man, he has a lot of moves. He can beat you inside or with power or outside. That alone will just makes him a lot to prepare for. And I actually think he's given what I've seen from Tyron Smith this year, I think this is one of the more dangerous types of rushers for him to go against, because he doesn't have the agility, just be like, oh, I understand you, I'll just run you up the arc like he used to. And so I actually think that's going to be a very dangerous matchup for the Jets in this one. Watt is playing at an extremely high level, getting chipped more than any other player in the NFL. Unbelievable run defender. It's him and probably Khalil Mack right now amongst the edge defenders in the league in terms of who's the best. Obviously, Bosa's in there too, playing really, really well, and Crosby as well. I think those guys are kind of in a tier together. Like, Watt is playing as good as any of those guys, like unblockable in the run game. Obviously the forced fumbles and things like that, which aren't fluky for him. They're consistent. They're every year.
He punches it out.
Yeah. He's
Ulbrich talked about it because they didn't. I thought the San Francisco game